everyone, and welcome to a really special episode of The Point. My name is Cara Santa Maria, and I'm the senior science correspondent for the Huffington Post. I'm also a friend of the Young Turks. I co-host often. And today we're going to do a really exciting episode that's all about atheism. And I just wanted to make a couple of points before we get started. You know, when I was even talking to my closest friends about doing this episode of The Point, I had mentioned how I really just want to get the word out about atheism. And even some of my best friends asked me things like, you know, that's so personal. Why do you want to preach your non-belief to everybody, which is infuriating. So I wanted to make it clear that the reason today that we have an atheist-only panel is that I didn't want this episode to devolve into a is there a God, is there not a God debate. What I really want to do is kind of get the word out, get atheists out of the shadows and talk about what we believe, what we don't believe, where we get our morals, and who we are as people. You know, we don't think that we're going to go to hell. We don't believe in hell. And like many of us have had to deal with in different questions and hate mail, we don't think we should just go ahead and kill ourselves already. Actually, that doesn't really make much sense to us. So I want to go ahead and get started by introducing our amazing panel. First, we have Michael Shermer. He is the publisher of Skeptic Magazine and a monthly columnist for Scientific American. And he's also an adjunct professor at Claremont Graduate University. His latest book is The Believing Brain. Next, we have Sean Carroll. He's a theoretical physicist at Caltech and a blogger at Cosmic Variance. His forthcoming book, The Particle at the End of the Universe, is about the Large Hadron Collider and the search for the Higgs boson.
Good to be here.
That's timely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And last, we have a friend of The Point, Edward Falzon, who's also a Huffington Post blogger. He's author of the ironically titled book, Being Gay is Disgusting, in which he methodically dismantles the many inaccuracies and contradictions contained in the Bible. And he's currently on his biblical morality tour of North America.
G'day.
Hi. So thanks for being here with me, you guys, and opening up about your atheism. We also have 3 great points this week. In a bit, we're going to hear from University of Minnesota Morris biology professor and popular science blogger P.Z. Myers. He says that politicians running for public office touting their religious beliefs should be forced to defend those beliefs, and I have to say I agree. Later, we're going to hear from A.J. Johnson. She's the development director for American Atheists, and she's going to argue that morality without God is actually superior to religion-based morality. But first, we're going to turn it over to legendary skeptic and enemy of charlatans around the world, the amazing James Randi. He's been hunting for years to find credible evidence of the existence of a higher power. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Hello, I'm James Randi, founder of the James Randi Educational Foundation. Now, the point I want to make here is that there are 2 kinds of atheists. One says that there is no deity. The other says that he or she finds no evidence that there is a deity. I'm the latter sort simply because I can't prove a negative. I can't even prove that there are no unicorns in Ecuador. The foundation that I represent has a prize of $1 billion to anyone who can prove any testable supernatural or paranormal claim, though the fact that this has been on offer for 16 years now certainly doesn't prove the non-existence of a God, of course. But it's interesting to note that not one applicant has ever offered to prove that claim. Another point, if there is a deity, it is bigoted, capricious, cruel, deceitful, genocidal, homophobic, insecure, intolerant, irrational, jealous, oh yes, very jealous, malevolent, misogynistic, racist, vindictive, and violent, a bully who demands constant praise, sacrifice, adulation, and ego support, or the penalties can be very severe, or don't you know your scriptures? Hey, I'm willing to be shown, but please spare me approaches like, well then how come the sky is blue, huh? No, that's not good enough. Contact us at www.randi, that's RANDI.org.
So I want to start off this conversation by asking a question to you, Sean. Do you think that science and religion are inherently in conflict? And what do you say to those who call science just another religion?
I think that science and religion are in conflict if you think of religion as something that has anything whatsoever to say about how the world works. You could define away the problem by saying that religion is just, a warm and fuzzy feeling I get about the awesomeness of reality and things like that. But that's not the religion we know and love, at least in the Western world. Religion makes claims about the existence of God, the existence of an afterlife, historical events. And when you make claims about things that happen in the world or how reality works, science can be brought to bear on them. I think that that's where the conflict lies, because science says, well, we throw out a bunch of hypotheses and we test them by making observations, and we see which of these ideas best fits the data. And the data we have right now speaks strongly against believing in the claims about the world that religion makes.
But what about what James said? We can't prove a negative. We can't prove that there is no God, and we can't prove that there is no afterlife, because it's a supernatural phenomenon, and science is only the study of the natural world, right? So.
Well, I'll be honest, I was very disappointed in the philosophical sophistication of Randy's little video there. I mean, his conclusions are completely correct, and he's very charismatic in saying it, and he's great at working in the plugs for his foundation effortlessly into the discussion. But he doesn't draw a very, very important distinction between proof and warranted belief.
Okay.
Of course, we cannot prove that there are no unicorns in Ecuador, but we all know there are no unicorns in Ecuador, at least not naturally occurring unicorns. And there's many, many things, we can't go through life only believing things that we can mathematically prove. Nobody believes that we can do that. No one thinks that we should try to do that. In science, we never prove anything, and yet we make progress because we have warranted belief. We have justifiable claims that we can back up with evidence. It's always contingent and tentative belief. It's 99.9999%. I believe that God does not exist exactly as much as I believe the sun will rise in the east tomorrow.
And I think that what you just said there, I think, is an important question, and I want to hear what you guys have to say about it. Oftentimes when I talk to my friends about my atheism, I tell them, in my mind, there's a big distinction between not believing in God and believing there is no God. And I always stick with the former. I say, I don't believe in God, but I like to say that I'm not so haughty as to believe there is no God. Some people don't really see the distinction there. Do you think it's important, you guys, to make a distinction?
No, it is not important to make that distinction. Do you believe the sun will rise tomorrow?
I know the sun will rise tomorrow.
No, you don't, because the Earth could be hit by an asteroid, big enough to destroy it. You don't know with 100% certainty that the sun will rise tomorrow.
What do you guys think? Is there a distinction there? Do you see those things as being the same?
There is a small distinction, although it's in usual grammar, it makes no difference. But I have been told many times by creationists, oh, you have a belief system because you believe there is no God. Now, to think that that's a belief system, of course, is sheer lunacy.
Yeah, what's the adage that atheism is a religion, like bald is a hair color?
Or off is a television station.
Exactly.
Right. Or I think Bill Maher said, atheism is a religion like abstinence is a sex position.
There you go. Yeah, it's the utter lack of religion.
Precisely.
It's the utter lack of belief.
Exactly. But the thing is that, in fact, there is abundant evidence on the non-existence of the Judeo-Christian God.
Yeah.
And this is something that can be disproven and has been disproven archaeologically and historically. The Judeo-Christian God is the most investigated and examined God of history. We spent the last 150 years, ever since there was the first real critical exegesis of the Bible in the mid-19th century in Germany. Anyone with a spade went into Israel and Syria and Egypt and started digging up, trying to find proof. And of course what they found was not only no evidence in favor of the Bible, but everything they found contradicted the biblical account.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it's the biblical account. It's not just is there a God, is there not a God? But, religion is not just I believe in God, that's that. There's so much dogma that comes along, especially when we talk about Judeo-Christian religions. There's so much dogma that comes along with it. And that's why I always would say, that I've known people who can kind of rectify science and their personal religion, but you definitely can't rectify science and fundamentalism. If you believe in a literal translation of the Bible, you are fundamentally anti-scientific.
Well, believers will often say, it's my faith, you can't prove it or disprove it. But in fact, they make claims that are testable all the time, that prayer works. They pray for their loved ones. They pray that Aunt Mary's cancer goes away. And Aunt Mary's cancer went away, and they take credit for that. And when Aunt Mary dies from her cancer, then they do not take that as a negative data point.
Yeah.
So when Randy's talking about there is that there are testable claims, and they are made all the time by believers. It's just that when you push them on it, like, okay, then let's actually put that to the test. And they go, well, no, that's just my faith. And so, when Huxley defined the term agnostic in 1869 as it's just not a knowable concept, nobody's actually an agnostic behaviorally. You act as if there is a God or there isn't a God. And so we all make that decision. And the question is, what do you make the decision based on? On some just sort of subjective feeling you have about the world, or in some rational form. So all we're doing as skeptics and atheists is saying, don't treat it any differently than any other claim. It's just if you think God acts in the world in any way at all, and every believer thinks that God acts in the world, in war or football games or cancer cures or whatever, they all think that.
TiVo.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think that, then it's legitimate for scientists to say, okay, in what way does God reach into the natural world and stir the particles in some way that causes DNA to do something, or cancer, or the football, or whatever, to change direction? And therefore it should be measurable, and a physicist like Sean should be able to say, show me where the particles are being pushed by some other force that we don't know about.
Yeah, I think you guys are actually being far too forgiving to religion. The rule is you should judge the claims of religion exactly the same way, like Michael says, you judge every other claim. And you're not agnostic about all sorts of weird claims you can't prove or disprove. You just say, that's silly, I'm not going to believe it. You should say the same about God.
Well, and I think it's important for us right now at the top of this show to make the distinction between, like you said, atheism and agnosticism, because I think, a lot of people come to me and they say, well, why do you say you're an atheist? That's, a pejorative label. I don't want to call myself an atheist. I'm going to call myself agnostic. And some people will say, oh, piss or get off the pot. Other people will say, well, I feel like that word doesn't really mean anything. And one of the first times that I think I came to grips with the fact that I am an atheist is after I read this book, The Case Against God by George Smith. Or Atheism, The Case Against God. And one of the important kind of points that he made in it was that we're all agnostic because nobody really knows. And whether, like you said, some of us are theistic agnostics and some of us are atheistic agnostics because we're going to act in such a way as to say God exists or God doesn't exist. But nobody really knows what happens when we die. Nobody really knows without a shadow of a doubt, like we said, whether or not God exists.
I can tell you if you'd like to know.
I'm sure we'd all love to know. But so I consider myself an atheistic agnostic, but why carry that label around?
Remember Colbert said an agnostic is just an atheist without balls. And I thought, okay.
Exactly.
That's probably right.
And the interesting thing too,
The reason you're hesitating at all is because we live in a Christian nation in which atheism is a bad word. So atheists have struggled with this, skeptics, what's the right word? They even tried on brights for a while. Following the gay movement, let's call ourselves gay, let's call ourselves bright. It's a happy term, and it just never caught on. Mm-hmm. And so we might as well just call ourselves an atheist. That's what it is.
Yeah, like
and
free thinker, secular humanist, like people kind of try and pick all these words that sound a little bit less non-theist.
Non-theist, yeah, non-believer. Yeah. Well, the fastest rising religious group in America is the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, the people that take none. They have no religion at all. Yeah. That's 20%, that's 1 in 5. That's a voting block.
Yeah.
That's a serious number of people. They're not necessarily atheists, but they're on the
But that's
the
thing, when
right.
you ask people, are you an atheist, the number plummets down to like less
yes,
than 5%.
But again, it's just a linguistic thing. It's only because they know that that's a bad name in America. In Europe, this is not an issue at all. Nobody cares. And so I just think we might as well just own the name and just put a positive spin on it. Like, we believe all sorts of things that are really good.
Yeah. Well, before we go to break, I want to just mention some statistics that I have here because they just blow my mind. In America, as of June 2012, in the most recent Gallup poll, 46% of Americans believe God created humans in their present form within the last 10,000 years, and only 15% think that humans evolved over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, and God had no part in this process. 46% of Americans believe in a fundamentally creationist view.
Yeah, but there's even more that believe in astrology and psychics and
That's
UFOs,
true.
and it's just across the board. an irrational society.
And strangely,
there's nothing particularly special about religious superstitions.
In America, 33% of scientists say that they believe in God. 18% say that they believe in a universal spirit or higher power. So collectively, we've got 51%, over half of the scientists who believe in some form of deity or higher power.
There's one problem with those surveys. Self-report data is always problematic in social science. You don't know what the person's actually thinking in their head. They have to tick a box.
Yeah.
So if you say, maybe some of them believe in sort of a Deepak-like or universal spirit force in the cosmos that has no personal anthropomorphic characteristics at all.
But still, you wouldn't call that person an atheist, would you?
Well, they might
believe
not,
in a cosmic consciousness.
but they don't believe in a Christian God, something
That's
like
true.
that. So when you say a third of scientists believe in God, we don't really know that they mean the anthropomorphic Yahweh.
Yeah, it's their
Probably
definition
not.
of God.
Probably. When you refine the surveys, the numbers go way down. Like members of the National Academy of Science, it's a single-digit number depending on which area you're in.
As seniority goes up in I think it's the National
Yes.
Academy and similar bodies
And also
around the world,
as
the seniority and the level of science goes up.
Eminence. As eminence goes up,
But also the
belief
definition of
goes
Belief goes
scientist
down.
in some of these
That's true. Yeah.
surveys.
That's
We're
right.
redefining as a
bit
scientist.
right.
And also, I
fuzzy.
think as you leave America, you start to see that number plummet too. So I want to go ahead and take our first break and invite all of the viewers out there to leave comments below, and we'll be right back in a bit. Welcome back to our special atheist episode of The Point. Our next point comes to us from P.Z. Myers. He's a biology professor at the University of Minnesota Morris, and he's also a blogger. Let's check it out.
My name is P.Z. Myers, and I'm a guy with a blog on the internet. My point is that I believe as politicians use their piety for political capital, it's time for atheists to nail them to the wall for the absurdity of their religious beliefs. Recently, after the landing of Mars Curiosity, Richard Dawkins made a comment on Twitter with reference to Mitt Romney. Yes, America still manages to reach Mars despite half the country preparing to elect a man who believes he will get a planet when he dies. I echoed it on my blog. It immediately stirred up complaints. People cited Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. That does not apply. We're not suggesting that believers should be prohibited from running for office, but if they're going to campaign on their religious beliefs, it should be made an issue. Clowns aren't forbidden to run for office either, but if they show up in a big red nose and clown shoes, we get to point and laugh. Dawkins was accused of bigotry. It's not bigotry to bring up relevant questions about the competence and intelligence of candidates. If a political candidate is going to bring into his office the Mormon leadership or the Catholic hierarchy or any peculiar institution is going to influence policy in irrational ways, it is a legitimate concern for the electorate. As long as candidates are going to campaign on their religion, atheists ought not to suffer the argument in silence. As long as their religious beliefs are going to be used to justify destructive policies on education, foreign affairs, the environment, and science and technology, we have an obligation to criticize those faulty premises. You can find more from me at freethoughtblogs.com/Pharyngula, which few of you will be able to spell, so just Google PZ. I'll be somewhere on the first page.
I have to admit, I always thought it was pronounced pharyngula, not pharyngula. I know.
What do you get for reading?
Right? I probably shouldn't have said that out loud. So my first question is for you, Michael. Do you think we should be asking Obama and Romney more about their religious beliefs?
It'd be my preference that we don't talk about religion at all because it's not supposed to be part of the political process. The whole point of a secular government is that it doesn't matter what religion you are, or even if you're not religious at all. These are the rules, this is the Constitution, this is what we're talking about. Unfortunately, that's not the country we necessarily live in, so these things do come up. And to the extent that any candidate ever leaks that he's informing his political decisions based on his religious preferences, then yes, I think we should push that line of inquiry. So for example, Paul Ryan's views on women's reproduction rights seems to be informed by his religious beliefs. So to that extent, then I think it's okay to push him on that. Somebody like Kennedy, who dispensed with his Catholicism and it never seemed to influence his political decisions, okay, fair enough, then we'll just drop that and focus on politics. But someone like Bush, who says, I talked to God and we're going to war, well,
Yeah.
then it's okay to push it.
I
So-
mean, and that's a big difference between somebody, again, who is kind of a fundamentalist, somebody who uses their religion as a platform for every decision that they make in their lives, and somebody who's kind of casually associated with their religion, somebody who feels the need to be outspoken about it from the beginning. But don't you feel like we've turned into a country where the more religious you are, the more likely you are to get elected?
In the Republican Party, hell yes.
But what about Obama? I mean,
Democrats too.
Obama got
Yeah.
elected, and you know what? I was really excited on Inauguration Day when he was elected because he gave a shout out to non-believers, and
And gays.
Yeah, and gays,
Yeah.
and it really meant something to me, and I always got the feeling that he was, my mother's a secular humanist, and like he never really came out and say it, but I got the feeling like Obama doesn't buy into this shit. But now all of a sudden I get Bible verses on my BlackBerry every morning, and I mean he's just pandering to the electorate, no?
I think he might be, but my philosophy is that we should believe what people say unless we have evidence to the contrary. I think that he says that he is a Christian and a believer, and I take his word for it.
Yeah.
He's also a politician, and I disagree a little bit with Michael. I think that we should talk about people's religious beliefs when they're running for office, because if I were religious, my religious beliefs would certainly inform my beliefs about what constitutes a just society, and that's important. I mean, like the example you gave is a great one. If I believe that life began at conception and is murder to have an abortion, that would affect my views about public policy. How could it not? So I think this is a very reasonable conversation to have, and you can be pro-religion or against religion, but I don't understand the attempt to pretend that religion doesn't matter for other beliefs that you might have.
Can you really be against religion
I
in
don't
this
think it's-
country
I
and
don't-
run for office?
Well, not at the moment. Well, actually,
There's one guy.
the recent poll, Gallup does since 1958, they've asked a question: who would you vote for, an atheist, or a woman, or a gay, and so on?
Yeah.
And atheist has always been the lowest, and in '58, I think it was at 18%. Now it's at 54. It broke the 50% mark mid last year. So
but we
this is a
still
good
don't
thing.
see
It's still the lowest.
out loud.
It's still
Yeah, we
well
still
below
don't
everybody
see
else.
outspoken atheists holding
I
public
think there's
office.
one atheist
There's one outspoken
congressman.
Yeah.
And did he
one-
run?
One declared atheist.
Yeah.
Did he declare himself as an atheist before he ran?
I'm not sure.
It's like once you get in, you're like,
there's
okay,
no,
now
look,
I'll
there's
let
no
you know.
question that in the United States,
Yeah.
you don't win votes by declaring yourself an atheist. I think that PZ's point is that, nevertheless, those of us who are atheists should be able to comment on what the religious beliefs of candidates mean.
I think it's not just about the atheist questioning. I mean, if you expect the world to end in our lifetime, this is not even about the morality, the
Yeah.
questions of moral laws. If you expect the world to end in our lifetime, you're not going to. It's bad to put someone like that in as the environment minister.
Oh, it's so scary.
What do you call it? Secretary for the Environment. Sorry.
That to me is the scariest aspect of global climate change, is that
Yeah.
it's not just that there's kind of a right-wing agenda that's based on, fiscal policy or what have you that says, we don't want to put all this money into helping to protect the environment because we don't really believe that climate change is real. And it's not just that it's anti-science, but there's a small sect, actually probably bigger than we'd like to admit, sect of people who think the world is supposed to end and who aren't going to try to change that because they think they're going to fly up to heaven on a chariot with God. How fucking scary is that these
But it's
people
been going
can
on for a
hold
long
public
time.
office?
It's been going on for a long
But
time. The
nobody likes to
Secretary-
talk about
The
that.
Secretary of the Environment under Reagan
Yeah.
apparently said,
He was the worst
we
of them."
don't need to worry about the environment because end times is at hand." And that was, how long ago was that now? 30 years?
But this is just an extreme example of the bigger picture, which is
And
that,
it's not even
of
extreme.
course,
This is very, this is
right.
This is like,
commonplace,
yeah, this is
pretty
every
extreme.
day.
And
But
that's
again,
just the
if you were
expectation. What
religious,
if-
you should use your religious beliefs to inform
But you
your
wouldn't.
opinion about other
but
things.
my guess is you wouldn't pepper Obama with a lot of questions because it doesn't seem like he allows his religious beliefs to inform his political decisions
Exactly,
at all.
and that's
So-
how I think that's what you were speaking to. That's how a responsible politician should be. They're going to inform their decisions not just with their religious beliefs, but with science, with evidence, with literature that they can find out there. And I think that up until recently, that's how kind of the political game was going in the UK. I mean, when I talk to my friends in the UK, they say, "Well, we don't talk about how
Right.
religious a candidate is. That's kind of off the table because that's not important to us." But you would hope that your candidates would actually be free thinkers enough that they wouldn't be,
I
that they
think-
wouldn't allow religion to
I think
trump
Obama
science.
is.
I think Obama is
I
too.
think he does probably
Romney?
believe, he says it a lot, but I don't think it's relevant at all to what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. Romney probably would be more so. So to a sliding scale. Okay, let's ask Romney about his Mormon beliefs. Does he really believe in the golden tablets that were discovered by Joseph Smith in Palmyra, New York, in his backyard? Does he really believe that? Because if he believes that, maybe that also informs his decisions on immigration or foreign policy or something like that. That would be legitimate, it seems.
But somehow that's
But
kind of off the
I wouldn't
table.
bother Obama with that because I don't think he.
Yeah, he'd be like, I don't, not
I
really.
think I think just on a fundamental level, one of the problems that I have with religious people in office is, do we want people that credulous, that instantly credulous, they'll believe almost anything they're told without evidence
Well,
to be
I
running the
don't,
country?
but it seems like the majority of voters do.
Which is
And
a
that's
bit
because
sad.
they want their leaders, they want to have a camaraderie with their leaders. They want a leader who they could have a beer with. They don't want their president to be smarter than them. I want my president to be smarter than me. I want my president, I want to put kind of my faith and my stock into a world leader that I think can be responsible for the entire country. But it seems like lately the voting republic just kind of is more interested in having a good old boy for president. I don't know. Am I wrong there?
Less than half. Not the majority. We have a president who,
That's true.
now who got elected, and
But right before that, we did have
every
Judah.
election's always pretty close, split right
Yeah.
down. 48, and then the other few percentage points of independents and those who don't vote. So it's not that discouraging.
But before that, we had George W. Bush.
And before that, we had Clinton. So
And
it swings
before-
back and forth.
And before that, we had George Bush Sr., who said out loud that he doesn't think atheists should be citizens.
Yeah.
I don't. I investigated that particular quote. I couldn't find any confirmation.
Yeah,
of
I've
it.
heard this too. There's reason
Yeah.
to be skeptical of that.
I-
yeah.
I'm actually in the process of compiling a little book of quotes about atheism and the founding of the,
Oh,
of the
interesting.
USA.
Yeah.
And I found that one, and of course that's a big one,
Yeah.
but I couldn't find any,
I don't
any
think.
confirmation.
Yeah, I think it's
of
one
that.
of those urban legends.
there's a
Anyone
great
who's
moment.
watching right now, I really
and-
want you to be able to comment, look it up, comment, tell us what you find. It's
There was a great
interesting.
moment in the Republican primary debates 4 years ago when they were asked, the candidates, do you believe that God created human beings, more or less in their current form? And it was great both because several people did raise their hands and because some of them were like looking at each other to know,
Yeah.
am I supposed to raise my hand here? I don't really know. But I think, and
was
actually
great.
Sam Brownback, who was running, felt so guilty about raising his hand, he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times trying to explain himself. But to me, it is at the very least of symbolic importance for the country to be led by someone who believes the scientific picture of the world. There's hot button issues. Evolution is one of them. Abortion is another one where religious beliefs come into
Climate
focus.
change.
Climate
Yeah.
change can be another one. But I think that they're not separate. We can't just sort of put them over here in a little box and say, well, these are the hot button religious issues. They come into play when we're asking, how does this person think about reality? How do they judge evidence? How do they feel about what is right and what is wrong in the world? Someone who doesn't believe in Darwinian evolution is not someone who I want to be leading my country.
No, because it relates to so many other aspects of critical thought. And also, these are people who are in charge of public policy when it comes to education. And the more that we see credulous people in office, the more that we see an agenda that's kind of anti-science being pushed through in the state, at the state level or even at the federal level, the less equipped the children that are coming up in the world today are going to be to make good decisions about who they vote for in the future. And you see a toilet effect, right? We're ringing the bowl.
It's one of the reasons intelligent design has gotten so much ground, even though it's lost every single court case. When the President of the United States says, I think they should be taught side by side, intelligent design and evolution should be taught side by side, and kids should decide. This is a nonsense statement.
Yeah.
But the
he's
fact
the
that the President
president.
said it emboldened everybody.
Yeah, when you're
to do
7
this.
years old, if that's what the president says, that means something. And you know
Not
what?
just
When
them,
you're
but
50 years old.
But also the evangelicals and the people pushing this, the
Exactly.
lobbying bodies, the schools, the school boards, the parents have all said, yes, excellent, we have a president on our side, we're going to push this now, we're emboldened to do this.
Yeah, so
I
at
think
this
that's one
point,
of the
it's not even so much about religion, it's not even so much about atheism, it's about science, you know? And sometimes I think those two things can't really be separated, atheism and science. There is so much overlap there. But on that note, I want to go ahead and take our next break and invite again everybody watching to leave comments below, and we'll be right back. Hi everyone, welcome back to our special atheist episode of The Point. Our final point today comes to us from AJ Johnson. She's the development director for American Atheists. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm AJ Johnson, development director for American Atheist. My point is that secular morality is fundamentally superior to religious morality, and it's time we own that. I'm an African American bisexual woman. As such, I've experienced firsthand the intolerance perpetrated against these and other identity groups under the auspices of religious morality. So let me be clear. Religious morality has supported slavery, misogyny, and homophobia throughout the ages, and religious morality continues to be the #1 source of opposition against equality for women and the LGBT community right now. Secular morality, on the other hand, tells us that this is wrong. The secular values of equality, diversity, and tolerance, while found nowhere in the Bible, thrive in America today. Why, you ask? Because secular morality is superior. So chin up, secular America, and don't be afraid to embrace the moral high ground. Be proud when you stand against the hate and bigotry of so-called religious morality. Because our modern morality demands that all Americans promote with vigor the freedom and fairness of our Constitution, including the right for all people to participate equally in the American dream. For more information about American Atheists, go to atheist.org and follow me on Twitter at happiestatheist.
All right, so I want to ask my first question to you, Edward. How can non-belief lead to this superior morality? And what do you think about very highly moral people like Fred Phelps, the leader of the Westboro Baptist Church? What would he have to say about this?
Fred's a great guy. We have beers regularly. I have met AJ as well. She is the happiest atheist I've met, so she has the right Twitter name. Non-belief doesn't lead to anything. It's a distinct lack of content. AJ talked about secular morality. Now, secular morality doesn't start with a foundation of here are the rules in the holy book. We start with nothing. So we start with a presumption of equality, I would think, and then we move from there. We don't start with we are in charge of the world. We were created specially. Women are subjected to men because you totally ate the apple first. And
Bitches.
I know. What is with you people? Just go on a diet. You just can't resist a piece of fruit. And so without all of that, we start with a clean slate. And from there, there's a fundamental difference in the approach to saying what's right and what's wrong. And this whole do unto others as you'd be treated is not really a great concept, but it's a good start. And this was created long before Jesus walked the earth and long before the Israelites, I should say, had any clue about morality. We had the Golden Rule was developed by Pittacus on one side of the world and Confucius on the other about 600 BC, 500 or 600 BC.
So why do we, and the Golden Rule does seem to kind of underpin almost every functional religion, right? So, but why do you think, or why does any of you think that people who say that religion is their source of morality simply cannot understand that they wouldn't want to murder their neighbor next door if God wasn't kind of looking down on them? Why that God-fearing view?
Well, I think that AJ's video is great, and it brings up this really important point when she says that secularists should own their superior morality. I think that we've been on the defensive for a very long time because traditionally the reason why things were right and wrong ultimately flowed from God, that God was helping us explain what is good and what is bad.
Which really means it flowed from some dude
of course,
who had a lot of power,
God
right?
doesn't
Some guy
exist.
who wanted
That's
to
right.
kind of,
So
well, I'm close to
people-
God. He told me this, so you need to
It's
look at me as a
remarkable.
prophet.
Totally had a dream about that.
Yeah, totally.
Amazingly, many of God's commands fit in with the local customs of the tribe who were writing them down. It's just coincidental, but
Yeah.
the shrimp thing still confuses me. But we haven't, as secularists, really given a good explanation of where our morality comes from. And partly it's because we don't know. Figuring out how to act in a world without guidance from outside anywhere is a very difficult problem. And we say nice things about equality and liberty and things like that. But we don't agree on the underlying philosophy, and we don't have the cheap out of saying, well, here's the holy book where it's all been written down. We have to think about
Yeah,
this.
we have to write our own book.
And I think that, yeah,
Sean,
we need to do a better job.
No one actually follows. This is one of the things I'm doing on my biblical morality tour. No one's following the Bible, even the most.
Thank goodness,
The
right?
most. Oh, hell yeah. Praise the Lord. Even the highly moral people like Fred Phelps are not following the Bible. You get the organizations that hide behind words like marriage and family and all of this nonsense. And all they're doing is lobbying the government to prevent gays from getting married, as if that makes any difference at all to their own marriage. But nobody's lobbying the government, for example, to force people to take a day off per week.
No.
Now, that's a commandment which carries the same death penalty as homosexuality. And there is a specific example in the book of Numbers that says, somebody gathered wood on the wrong day of the week and he was put to death as an example to make sure no one else works on the Sabbath. No one is lobbying the government to make working on Sunday illegal. But if you want to help family, if you want to help marriage, take a day off a week, spend some time with your spouse, spend some time with your kids. I would support a notion of pulling back this workaholic syndrome, not on a religious basis, but simply because it would actually help. But no one is actually lobbying the government for that. No one. And so no one follows the Bible as it is.
Because they don't honestly want to see us legislating morality.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not a moral cause.
Religious
It's an
people
in-group,
live-
out-group fear cause.
Precisely. Religious people live an entirely objectively secular life. They just don't want to admit that they do.
I think they don't even know. I think they don't even think about it. I think they've been swept along with the tide of the Enlightenment change of more secular values, and they're not even aware of it. I mean, today's conservative, the average conservative, is more liberal than liberals were a century ago. And they don't even know it. They've just been swept along. I mean, one of my favorite moments in religious history is when Joseph Smith told his wife, Emma, about the new revelation he had about the woman down the street that he was going to get to marry. Now, you can imagine how this would go over with your wife, Sean, if you said, honey, I was talking to God, and yeah, you'd get slapped. I mean, no woman would put up with this today, right?
It's a black belt, it would not be a slap.
It would not be a slap. Right, so
Yeah.
that sort of thing that could be sold a century ago, it would not fly today.
Yeah, same with virgin birth. I mean, look on the flip side, right?
Right.
Like, ooh.
I forget who had this great line that most religious people view morality from the Bible much like a software license. You just skip to the end and click I agree without reading all the boring parts in between.
Right.
But again, I do want to be tough on ourselves. I don't think that we have the competing package to really sell in a compelling way. And so, we atheists need to do a better job of that. It's not enough to ridicule the religious side of things. We need to do the hard work.
I disagree. Well, we need to do hard work, sure, but
We can do the easy work first.
we have the origin of morality, surely, in evolutionary terms. We
No.
every behaviour that we have in humanity, group solidarity, coordination, social hierarchies, war, rules of engagement of war, all of these things we find in the animal kingdom.
Sure,
we can
patriarchy,
see,
we find lots of things
and we
in the
can,
animal
That's true. I mean, that's the thing. Would you want to, you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater there. Like, would you consider animals to be moral beings?
if you watch,
Pre-moral.
there's a very
Pre-moral. I love that. Yeah.
pre-moral. Well, no,
the
it's true. It's
foundation-
Yeah.
an example. There
Say
It really
the
kinda
foundation of reciprocity. Animals know, primates know what's fair and not
Yeah.
fair. And we put language to it, and we act on it, and we talk about it. Animals don't. But because we have language. So that's a foundation in which we can derive.
But as the only woman on the panel, I have to also say there's a hell of a lot of rape in the animal kingdom.
And,
a hell of a lot.
And in the human kingdom too, but less
There
than there
is.
used to be.
There is, and that that may be explained by this kind of evolutionary morality. That kind of men were stronger and they could, subjugate women more easily. And so it's only once I think women were able to come out and speak about these things and get the right to vote and all of this that we started to see more, equality.
That's
there.
why you need a strong government with rules of law, because otherwise guys will get away with whatever they can. People will cheat if they can.
But this is the conversation we need to have, because you don't want to just commit the naturalistic fallacy. You don't want to say that because things happen in nature, they're the right things to have happen. We need to explain why. What is the fundamental reason for saying that some behavior is good, some behavior is bad? I think that evolution helps us explain why we have the predilections that we do, and evolution is certainly going to play a crucially important role in an ultimate understanding of morality, but it doesn't give it to us in any simple way. We should be able to do better than that.
But I want to kind of flip the script really quickly before we end to talk about, we've been talking about kind of an intrinsic morality, you know, a lack of belief and still being able to have a strong morality and not being linked with religion. But what about kind of the religious morality and especially their view towards atheists? There was a study in 2011 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that found that generally speaking, people deemed atheists less trustworthy than rapists. Why are we viewed that way by the general public?
Because we're European and we were, because we're European and Christianity controlled Europe for 1,500 years.
Yeah, but I mean, is it really that feels like a simple
again,
explanation.
This is just, again, people don't think about this. They're just ticking boxes or
Exactly.
whatever. I mean, nobody would say that about, say, a Jew today.
But that's the thing, you can tick a box
because
without
the
anybody
shift-
looking
the
over
shift
your
has
shoulder.
The shift has happened. It will happen for atheists. It's happening for gays. It will happen for atheists.
It will happen, but I still think that it's kind of the last shift to occur.
Yeah.
And what's
But we're
strange is
getting there.
a lot of people don't
what's
view
the
it
source
as
of these questions, though, on this graph? Did someone say, would you rather your daughter date an atheist or a rapist?
No. What it was actually, it actually wasn't
I
a
hope that
straightforward
wasn't the
question.
question.
It was kind of a reaction time
Right,
test. You
exactly.
know, it was looking
Yeah.
for kind of subliminal.
But the social
again,
science
you
of the graph is not that critical. I mean, I take your point, Kara, to be
Mm-hmm.
that it is socially acceptable to mistrust atheists. This is-
Exactly.
and like you say, Michael, this is changing, but it doesn't just change. It changes
we have to
because
work at it.
we
And
have
really,
shows on
this
YouTube that
isn't-
help convince people that atheists are
Exactly.
charming and moral people.
And this is exactly. But this really is an issue.
Well, you know.
It's an issue for, you know, it's a civil rights issue. It's a civil liberties issue. And that's what groups like American Atheists are trying to show the public. And that's what a lot of people, I think, still don't understand. Even, you know, like I said at the top of the show, one of my best friends, I was having a conversation about this with them. And I was saying, no, we need to get the word out because of how much, you know, stereotyping that there is. And my friend was saying, you know, but I said, if I wanted to do an episode about gay and lesbian issues and have all gay and lesbians on the panel, you wouldn't be saying the same thing about why do you want to preach your beliefs to people. And he was saying, yeah, but that's not a choice. And it kind of struck me, and I thought, well, it's not my choice to not believe in God. Trust me, I was raised Mormon in a very fundamental household. I damn sure wanted to believe in God. I wanted to please my parents. I worked really hard at trying to develop this belief system. I got baptized. I did all of the things that I was supposed to do. And in spite of that, I couldn't believe. And by 14, I had to leave the church because I felt like every day I was lying to myself and I just felt guilty all the time. You know, belief is sometimes not a choice for people. You can be brainwashed into believing if your entire, you know, surrounding environment forces that. And the lack of belief, I think, comes with enlightenment. It comes with reading. It comes with learning, or at least that was my experience.
And of course, don't forget, homosexuality is totally a choice.
Oh yeah, especially according to the
According
believers
to the
out
highly
there.
moral Fred Phelps.
You know, and I have one other question. You know, we kind of mentioned earlier about the quote from George Bush Sr., which we found may or may not be true, but you know, this issue about it being a civil liberty. In America, we feel a lot of oppression, but I know, Edward, you had written a blog recently on HuffPost about oppression in other countries, specifically in Indonesia, and I wanted you to maybe speak a little about that.
Yeah, Alexander, I think it's pronounced Aan is his last name, he created a Facebook group regarding atheism. He questioned the existence of God, posted some rather unflattering pictures of Muhammad. He was hunted down, beaten by a mob, then they called the police. They arrested him, he was beaten in prison when the prisoners found out why he was there. Then he was imprisoned for 2.5 years, sentenced to prison for 2.5 years, basically for being an atheist, and also fined the equivalent of 2 years' annual salary in Indonesia. So there's been a push to try and, you know, help this guy. There was a petition that a petition to the White House. They needed 25,000 signatures. I'm not sure they quite got the 25,000 signatures for Barry to try and step in and ask, to do something about it.
Yeah.
I dare say he wouldn't have done anything anyway.
I signed that.
I signed it too.
Me
Hell
too.
yeah. Well, I blogged about
Yeah.
it and tried to encourage people to go and sign it.
And I mean that's an issue that a lot of times we talk about the frustrations that we have, and in some ways we're dealing with first world issues here.
Right.
There are a lot of countries
Yeah.
where it's not just about I can't hold office, or
Yeah.
my friends make fun of me, or where there's violence perpetrated, where it's actually still against the law to speak out about your atheism, and that's
It's
just
against the law to be an atheist.
Yeah.
You have to be in Indonesia, you have to be one of the 5 allowed religions. And they're all about monotheism, but oddly, they allow Buddhism. So I don't know how that all
Which
works.
is the closest thing. I mean, I guess that's the cover there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I want to go ahead and thank you guys so much for being here, and let us know where people can find you. First, Michael Shermer.
Skeptic.com.
Great. And Sean Carroll.
The website is preposterousuniverse.com, and I blog at Cosmic Variance.
And also Edward Falzon.
I am at biblicalmorality.com and I blog on Huffington Post.
Great. And I want to also say thank you to our Point contributors, PZ Myers, AJ Johnson, and James Randi. I'm Cara Santa Maria. You can find me on Facebook or on Twitter at Cara Santa Maria. Also, if you go to carasantamaria.com, it'll forward you to my column on Huffington Post Science called Talk Nerdy to Me. Heathens greetings, and thank you all for watching The Point.